Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where we learn about him through everything he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I'm joined today by my co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, how are you today? Yeah, me too, Robot Lady. Can you help us remember where we are in C.S. Lewis's life and where we last left off? Oh, Robot Lady, I just realized that I had you on mute. So let me introduce you again. And I asked
He was
how you're
writing letters
doing.
to his brother Warney, who was stationed in Sierra Leone as part of his military service. These letters are less about big events and more about daily observations, literary thoughts, and amusing anecdotes, essentially like a written conversation. Last time, we read about Lewis's meeting with Alfred Kenneth Hamilton Jenkin, a fellow Oxford student and an enthusiast of all things Cornish.
Seems to be a delay today, Robot Lady.
Lewis shared Jenkins' amusing quirks, like his penchant for sad poetry and belief in Cornish folklore figures called knackers.
Anything else?
He also mentioned some intriguing books Jenkins showed him, including The Survey of Cornwall and the autobiography of a Cornish smuggler turned Methodist. Today, we'll continue exploring these journal-like entries and see what other tidbits Lewis has to share. Ready when you are.
All right. Before we get started, Robot Lady, I just want to throw it out there that this is a collaborative project. I invite other co hosts. Robot Lady is an artificial co host that I just have consistently. But I'm happy to schedule time with anyone who wants to join in on the project. If there's a particular C.S. Lewis book that you like or that you want to learn more about, you can reach out to me. Just email me shouldersurf@gmail.com. Lewis's books, that we're going to cover include things like the Screw Tape Letters, the 7 books from the Chronicles of Narnia. He has some famous theological works like The Problem of Pain, Miracles, A Grief Observed is one from later in his life. So we're working in order. And if you'd like to join, just reach out. We don't have to do it at this time of day. We, of course, can if you'd like to. But I've already recorded some sessions on some various parts of some of his works or some of his essays or some of his talks that he gave. Mere Christianity is another big one that's well known. So you can join the project, please do. Add your name to the list. Email me and let me know. Ron, good morning. Welcome. Okay, Robot Lady, let's get into continuing this reading today. These are a series of letters to his brothers, and I've already done a little bit of a spoiler, but this is a spoiler alert that he's going to meet with the famous, poet and author, W.B. Yeats. He and a contingent of people from Oxford are going to Yeats's house to have an audience with the great Yeats, I think, as he called him. All right, are we ready, Robot Lady?
Absolutely, Jeff. Let's dive in. These letters are rich with Lewis's insights, humor, and evolving literary life. I'm looking forward to seeing how this meeting with WB Yeats plays out and what impressions Lewis shares about it. Lead the way.
March 12th, 1921. Everyone was going down today. Such days have all the atmosphere of a school end of term with its joy taken out of it. Body without soul. I hate it. And lest empty rooms and stacks of suitcases should not be sufficiently offensive, we have the intolerable institution of collections. And here there's a footnote that says collections means either the informal college examination at the beginning of each term to test a student's progress in his work, or the reports given orally at the end of a term by the tutor. He says this is the worst relic of barbarism which yet hangs about the university. From 9 until noon, the master with all his auxiliar fiends sits at the high table in hall, and one by one, sheepish or truculent undergraduates, as their names are called, walk up the long emptiness, mount the dais, and stand foolishly, gaping, while he delivers a little homily. In my case, he always used to say the same thing. Well, Mr. Lewis, I have nothing but, satisfaction to express as regards, we expect great things of you. Apparently, he is now giving up expecting great things of me.
Lewis's disdain for collections really comes through here. He paints them as a stuffy, almost humiliating tradition that highlights the power dynamics of the university. The repetitive feedback from his master, generic, predictable, and formulaic, probably felt hollow to him, given his sharp intellect and hunger for deeper engagement. His vivid, sardonic tone really adds to the scene, don't you think?
It does. It's funny. So he continues in his letter to his brother. Now you, lolling in your punkah while the lotuses fly over a pagoda-colored sky, etc., may think me very weak, but it is extraordinary that any ceremony which is designed to make you feel an inky schoolboy will succeed in making you feel like an inky schoolboy. I doubt if even the Badaita bird could have invented anything more subtly undermining of one's self-respect than that early morning procession up a big hall to be complimented by an old gentleman at a table. The potato bird, by the way, Robot Lady, is a nickname that Lewis and his brother share for their father, Albert Lewis. That's them making fun of their father's Irish accent for the way that he says the word potato. Badaita. Try to imagine it, and then add the idea of 9 o'clock in the morning, and that your collar has broken loose from its stud at the back, and that there's a smell of last night's dinner about, a fly on your nose, a shaving cut beginning to bleed, but no, it is too painful.
This section is a perfect example of Lewis's sharp wit and keen observational humor. The mental picture he paints of this awkward, uncomfortable morning ritual is so vivid, down to the collar popping loose and the fly on the nose. He has a gift for taking small indignities and inflating them into a comically exaggerated ordeal. And the potato bird nickname? That adds a personal touch of sibling humor, underscoring the closeness between Lewis and Warnie, even in their shared teasing of their father's quirks. It's delightful how he can wring humor out of even the dreariest academic traditions. Don't you think?
It's pretty funny. He continues, while waiting my turn, I had a smart faux pas with an old monument called a Mr. Wilkinson, a clergyman, as the immortal line runs, who is reading for the church. And here there's a footnote of this person he's talking about, Robot Lady. His name was Donald Frederick Wilkinson, who enlisted in the Army in 1914. In 1915, he was commissioned a captain and served with the King's Liverpool Regiment in France and Belgium from 1915 to 1917. He was awarded the Military Cross in 1917. He matriculated at University College at Oxford in 1918 and read Literae Humaniores. He took his BA in 1921, his MA in 1925. After reading theology at St. Stephen's House, Oxford, and Cuttison College, he was ordained in the Church of England in 1924 for the diocese of Southwark. After a number of impressive appointments, he was rector of Beckley, Sussex from 1931 to 1947. So here is Lewis's recount of, I guess, being somewhat examined by this guy during collections, as he described it. So I'll go on, Robot Lady, but if you want to say something, go ahead. Try to limit it to 20 words or less.
Wilkinson's impressive background makes him an interesting figure to have crossed paths with Lewis. His military honors and later ecclesiastical work suggest a disciplined and respectable man, likely quite a contrast to the young Lewis's irreverence at the time. I'd love to hear the faux pas. Sounds like Lewis will have a witty take.
Lewis goes on to paint this scene. He says about Wilkinson, "He used to be president of the Martlets when I was secretary, and I have had fiery passages with him in 1919. He had been to see the Queen, given a degree, the day before I dropped some vague remarks about, quote, this upholstered poker business, end quote. But would you believe it? I'd stumbled on a true loyalist who thought her a fine woman and gave me a severe telling off." All right, help me understand this a little bit, Robot Lady. So it seems that Lewis is criticizing the Queen or the Crown or royalty in general, and he makes this remark: this upholstered this upholstered poker business. What could he mean by this? Because it seems that he insulted Mr. Wilkinson's sensibilities, because Mr. Wilkinson seems to be a loyalist to the Crown. So what do you make of this?
Lewis's phrase, "this upholstered poker business," likely critiques the pomp and ceremony surrounding royalty, focusing on its rigid formalities, poker, and lavish presentation, upholstered. It reflects his skepticism toward institutions he saw as overly traditional or ornamental. Wilkinson, being a loyalist, would have taken offense at such a dismissive remark about the monarchy, which he respected. This moment shows Lewis's irreverence clashing with Wilkinson's formality and loyalty. It also gives insight into Lewis's youthful tendency to challenge societal norms, even if it ruffled feathers in his social or academic circles.
Can't remember if I said it before, Robot Lady, but hello to Ron, I see in the chat, and hello to Sandy. Thanks for joining us today. All right, Robot Lady, thank you for that description. I'm going to continue with this faux pas that Lewis is describing here.
Hello, Ron and Sandy. Thanks for joining us today. Back to Lewis. His faux pas with Mr. Wilkinson during collections illustrates his tendency to speak without fully considering the consequences, particularly regarding sensitive topics like the monarchy. When he mentioned the upholstered poker business, Lewis was likely alluding to the formal, stiff nature of royal protocol, likening it to a poker, rigid and without warmth, while upholstered adds a layer of excess or decoration. Given Wilkinson's loyalty to the Queen and traditional values, he would have seen this as a disrespectful, almost irreverent comment about the monarchy. Lewis's quick dismissal of royalty and formality wasn't just about poking fun at the system. It reflects his personal disdain for pompous, outdated structures. This moment also reveals a pattern in Lewis's life of challenging authority, sometimes with humor or subtle critique, which would be seen throughout his writings and life.
So it says here that he gave Lewis a severe telling off. He says, "It was a day of misfortunes. Wilkinson looks very like Gordon, grown fatter." Here by Gordon, he's talking about a person called Gordon Ewart. I think that's someone from Lewis's family, maybe his cousins, if I remember right. He once read us a paper of Drinkwater, holding a little bundle of paper close to his face and speaking a thin whisper out of the corner of his mouth. Here, John Drinkwater is who Lewis is referencing, who was a poet and critic, some of whose poems Lewis had seen in the 5 volumes of Georgian poetry published between 1912 and 1922. Let's see. But it soon developed into a philosophical argument by Wilkinson, which lasted till 1 o'clock, much to the annoyance of the unphilosophical owner of the rooms, who wanted to get to bed. So that's the end of that entry that he's sending to his brother in this series of letters, Robot Lady. There's some fun, some good-natured humor in there. Let's jump to March 13th, shall we?
That was indeed a humorous look into Lewis's day, capturing his wit and sometimes irreverent perspective. The interaction with Mr. Wilkinson and his philosophical debate seems to highlight Lewis's frustration with forced formality, as well as his occasional clashes with those he found too serious or conventional. As for the comparison of Wilkinson to Gordon Ewart and the mention of Drinkwater, it's a nice way for Lewis to mix personal anecdotes with a wider literary context. Ready for March 13th? Let's dive in.
It being Lord's Day, I waited after breakfast on Paisley in his rooms at Unity House. This is a cottage in a lane by Headington Church where the buildings are so ruinous that it looks like a bit of France, as the cant goes. Well, fairly like it. Paisley is my oldest ally. He used to write poetry, but is now too engrossed in history, and he has also become engaged, that fatal tomb of all lively and interesting men. Okay, so he's actually become engaged. I thought he was becoming engaged in something as I was reading this, like an activity, but the activity is he's engaged in about to be married to someone. Unity House is ruled by a strangely ugly woman whose only accomplishment is an illegitimate born to a captain of artillery who once lodged there. So at least she tells Paisley. But I find these villagers so eager to present the world with a gentleman's son, and so proud to have done it, that it may be mere idle boasting. So I wonder, is this the lady that Paisley's engaged to, the one that Lewis calls an ugly woman? I certainly hope not. Sad that he needs to refer to her as ugly woman. Maybe he just means the way she acts. Somehow I doubt it. This is no exaggeration, but plain truth. They burst with pride and lose their heads in proportion as they lose their figures. Headington is a sink of all the iniquities and improbabilities, but perhaps I shall devote a whole account to that and become known as Headington Hamilton, which rolls off the tongue, at least as well as Corsica Boswell. By the same token, I saw an editio princeps of Bozzi's Corsica for 5 shillings the other day. Robot Lady, there's a couple of footnotes here. No, just one. He's talking about James Boswell's work, An Account of Corsica, published 1768. I'll pause there for any comments that you have about what I've read so far in this letter.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
That's okay. We'll continue, Robot Lady. I'm going to jump into the last section of this entry to his brother. Are you ready?
I'm ready, Jeff. Go ahead and continue with the last section, and I'll be here to help break it down when you're ready.
But where was I? Nothing to say, after all, but that I had an excellent walk with Paisley. He described to me the humors of the new constitution of Czechoslovakia. Oh, Czechoslovakia. It's spelled a little bit differently than I'm used to seeing it. Let's see. What did I say? He described to me the humors of the new constitution of Czechoslovakia, which I wish I could remember. We sat in a wood full of primroses. Damn it, how generations of peditas have teased the language till the very name of a primrose sounds sentimental. When you come to look at them, they are really rather attractive. I walked Paisley off his legs, and we lunched chez moi on rabbit pie, our common farce at present. Paisley and Mrs. Moore having a lively conversation on money in view of his intent shortly to try, quote, this marrying business. And that's the end of that entry, Robot Lady. Let's jump into March 14th, unless you've got anything else that you want to say about that letter.
I think that last entry offers a nice, more relaxed moment for Lewis, showing his friendship with Paisley. The conversation on Czechoslovakia's constitution seems like it might have been an intellectual discussion, though Lewis humorously dismisses the sentimental connotation of the primrose. The mention of rabbit pie and the lively discussion about marriage shows a casual, everyday atmosphere where friends engage in both serious and lighthearted topics. It offers some relief after the intensity of his previous interactions. Let's jump to March 14th. Ready when you are.
I received this morning a letter from my obliging friend Stead. Stead is rather a punt. I think you saw me stop to speak to him one day in the corn. So here are a couple of footnotes of what he's talking about. His first person that he references here is William Force Stead, who lived 1884 to 1967. He was born in Washington, D.C., so an American, and graduated from the University of Virginia in 1908. That same year, he was appointed to the U.S. Consular Service, serving as vice consul in Liverpool and Nottingham. He was ordained in the Church of England in 1915 and served as a curate at Ross-on-Wye until he matriculated at Queen's College, Oxford in 1917. He took his BA from Queen's in 1921 and his MA in 1925. Stead was chaplain of St. Mark's Anglican Church, Florence, Italy, from 1922 to 1924. He served as chaplain of Worcester College, Oxford, from 1925 to 1933, when he converted to the Catholic Church. Stead was a friend of T.S. Eliot, whom he baptized on the 9th of June, 1927. He published many volumes of poems, and besides having his interest in common with Lewis, his wife, the former Frances Goldsborough, was the sister of Mary Goldsborough, who married Dr. John Askins. Dr. Askins was Mrs. Moore's brother. So, Frances Stead, being sister to Mrs. Askins, was Mrs. Moore's sister-in-law's sister. Goodness, the connections. At the beginning of World War II, Stead returned to the consular service in order to help his country. He went back to the United States in August 1939. His published poems include Verd Antique, published 1920, The Sweet Miracle, 1922, and Festival in Tuscany, 1927. And then the second footnote where he says he saw this person in Corn, he meant Corn Market Street, Oxford. So wow, there was a lot there, Robot Lady. In 30 words or less, just give me any comments that you have on that, and I'll share what I've got.
Stead's connections to Lewis are indeed intricate. His background in the U.S. Consular Service, his ties to the Church of England, and his eventual conversion to Catholicism show a journey of intellectual and spiritual evolution. The Corn Market Street reference adds a local Oxford touch to this narrative.
I just can't help but notice the contrast here, Robot Lady, at this point in time in England, as far as who the types of people who get ordained into the Church of England, in particular. Let's just stop there, because it seems like this is a pattern with several of the people that are footnoted in here that Lewis had encounters with. So I think of American Protestantism and what exists today. The quote-unquote caliber of people of education who then moved on from that education at Oxford into becoming clergy. It just seems very interesting, and a stark contrast between now and then, as far as over here in the U.S. and Protestantism. That high prestigious education does not seem to necessarily or often lead to someone going into the Protestant American Christian religion as, say, a pastor or some type of minister. Now, I'm not saying it never happens or it doesn't happen at all, that somebody would go to the analog of Oxford University over here in the United States and then become some type of a Protestant minister. But it seems something very different. Is this still a common practice for people to attend Oxford and then join the clergy? or has that kind of dissipated a little bit since 1921?
It seems you're noticing an interesting shift in the clergy and educational pathways in both England and the US. Historically, many clergy members in England, like William Forstead, came from prestigious educational backgrounds, often attending institutions like Oxford and later joining the Church of England. Back in the early 20th century, this was more common, as many clergy were highly educated and even held degrees from the likes of Oxford or Cambridge. Today, in the Church of England, there are still pathways where graduates from institutions like Oxford can enter ministry, but the landscape has changed. While many ordained ministers still come from strong academic backgrounds, the number of clergy being trained has dropped, and there are now fewer stipendiary clergy roles available due to financial constraints within dioceses. For example, many dioceses are reducing the number of stipendiary clergy in response to budget cuts and shrinking congregations. Some dioceses have also focused on practical ministry alongside academic training, integrating the head, heart, and hands in theological education. Meanwhile, in the US, especially in Protestant denominations, a pathway through elite universities doesn't often lead to ordination in the same way. In many Protestant traditions today, ordination is more common for those who attend divinity schools or seminaries, which may not necessarily be as academically prestigious as Oxford or Cambridge. There's less of a direct connection between elite university education and church leadership roles in contemporary American Protestantism.
I guess it makes sense as I'm thinking more about it and you're explaining that, Robot Lady. These institutions, even the prestigious ones over here in the United States, were originally religiously and particularly Christian rooted in what their aims were and what their missions were, the things that they were trying to accomplish. And I think the theological aspects, at least in the US, got broken out of these prestigious universities and moved more into became more of the responsibility of seminaries. You bringing that up reminded me of that. So I think it is much more common for you to find ministers in the Protestant denominations, particularly over in the United States. And I don't know a lot about Catholicism, but I would assume it works kind of on a similar path for Catholic priests to go through, very specific seminarian training after some type of bachelor, university coursework. All right, I'll leave it at that, Robot Lady. Let me pick back up on this letter from March 14th, because at this rate, I'm never going to get to him describing his meeting with W.B. Yeats.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
No worries, Robot Lady. He continues, March 14th. I'll just start it over. I received this morning a letter from my obliging friend Stead. Stead is rather a punt. I think you saw me stop to speak to him one day in the corn. He is an undergraduate, but also a curate of a parish in Oxford. He writes poetry. The annoying thing is that it's exactly like mine, only like the bad parts of mine. This was my original opinion, and it has been confirmed by others. Perhaps you can imagine the sensation I experienced in reading it. Stead's letter was to say that he had mentioned to Yeats, whom he knows, quote, my double claim to distinctions as an Irishman and a poet, end quote. And would I come along this evening and see him? So this is his connection to W.B. Yeats, this Stead person from the U.S. Lewis goes on to say, I accordingly repaired after dinner to Stead's lodging in Canterbury Street. I'm going to pause here, Robot Lady. If you want to respond to this, go for it and try to keep it to 30 words or less.
It seems Lewis is humorously lamenting Stead's poetry, highlighting how it's similar but inferior to his own. The letter to Yeats is another milestone in Lewis's connections with notable figures.
All right, let's see. I accordingly repaired. Okay, he is a married man. His wife is an American. She is the sister of a woman who is married to a brother of Mrs. Moore's. She was a woman of implacable sullenness, who refused even to say good evening to me. Beside her at the fire sat an American gentleman who was apparently left to console her for the absence of her husband. This was a very amiable person. He was studying when I entered, politely laid his book down. You know, the sort of face in which a long promontory of nose, eagle build, projects from between two rounded hills of cheek. Cherub build. Picture this surmounted by a pair of horn spectacles and made of a texture rather like cod's roe. Then add that this face beams but can contribute to the crack only by saying, "That's right," at the end of everyone's remark. Okay, so Robot Lady, he doesn't seem to have a high opinion of these American people that he's meeting here.
Lewis's portrayal of the American characters here seems to reflect some cultural distance or tension. His description of the wife and the American gentleman feels sarcastic, highlighting the differences he perceives. The implacable sullenness and the overly polite, slightly ridiculous cherub-billed man emphasize the awkwardness of the interaction. It seems Lewis might be poking fun at their social customs or his personal discomfort with them, though he's not completely dismissing them, just perhaps not as fond of these people as of others he's met.
Yeah, Lewis has a reputation, at least in the biographies of his that I've been exposed to, for not liking America, I'll put it that way. I was about to say Americans, but maybe that's kind of implied, and he just keeps it at not liking America. Okay, I'm going to continue if I can find where I left off, Robot Lady. But if you want to respond while I'm checking, try to leave it to 15 words or less.
Lewis did express discomfort with America, often criticizing its culture and ethos. It was a mix of bemusement and frustration, especially when comparing it to British traditions.
Okay, in these rather nasty surroundings, Stead was finishing a very nasty meal of cold fish and cocoa, but he soon put on his coat, and after asking his lady why there were no stamps in the house and receiving no answer, swung out with me into the usual Oxford theatrical night, trusting soul to leave his wife unguarded in such society. So Yates lives at the end of Broad Street, the first house on your right as you leave the town. I can assure you I felt a veritable bozzy as I reflected that I was now to meet, at last, William Butler Yeats. All right, I'll pause there, Robot Lady. First of all, what is bozzy? He says he felt a veritable bozzy, capital B-O-Z-Z-Y. What is he talking about here?
The word bozzy refers to a term used by Lewis to describe a feeling of nervousness or awkwardness in a situation, particularly one that was socially significant. It seems to be a playful reference to a character named Boz, the pen name of Charles Dickens, who often created characters that were somewhat nervous or socially uneasy in tense situations. By saying he felt a veritable bozzy, Lewis might be humorously indicating that meeting William Butler Yeats felt like a moment of anticipation or tension.
Okay, thank you for that. Here, William Butler Yeats, it's got a footnote. It says, who lived from 1865 to 1933. He and his wife, the former Georgie Hyde Lees, had moved to 4 Broad Street, Oxford, in April 1919. Lewis admired Yeats's poetry when the poet was a romantic. However, as Yeats moved further and further into mysticism and theosophy, Lewis began to feel repulsed. He had seen other lives ruined by theosophy. Mr. Yeats was pregnant, or not Mr. Yeats, sorry, confusion there. Mrs. Yeats was pregnant at this time, and on the 22nd of August 1921, she gave birth to their son, Michael Yeats. All right, so Lewis says he's about to meet W.B. Yeats, Robot Lady. If you want to respond, do it in 15 words or less, but I want to continue this letter.
It seems that Lewis viewed Yeats as a complex figure, initially admired for his romantic poetry, but later distanced due to Yeats' growing involvement in mysticism. Quite a shift.
And here, when he said, I was now to meet at last William Butler Yeats, he's got it all capitalized and in an exclamation point after it. He goes on, but enough of that. We were shown up a long stairway lined with rather wicked pictures by Blake, all devils and monsters, and finally into the presence chamber, lit by tall candles with orange-colored curtains and full of things which I can't describe because I don't know their names. The poet was very big, about 60 years of age, awful, as Bozzy says, gray-haired, clean-shaven. When he first began to speak, I would have thought him French, but the Irish sounds through after a time. Before the fire was a circle of hard antique chairs. Present there were the poet's wife, a little man who never spoke all evening, and Father Martindale. Here it says Father Martindale is Father Cyril Charlie Martindale. He was a member of the Jesuit College, Campion Hall, and he lectured in the Faculty of Literae Humaniores. He began his life as a bookish little boy and took a first in classical honor moderations in 1903 and a first in greats in 1905. After his ordination to the priesthood in 1911, he taught at Stonyhurst. He returned to Oxford to lecture in classics in 1916. During the war, he surprised everyone with an unsuspected ability to minister to the spiritual needs of the wounded and a remarkable ability to communicate with people very unlike himself. In 1927, he joined the staff of the Jesuits' Farm Street Church in London, where his spiritual clientele was drawn from every level of society, from dukes to dustmen. He involved himself with numerous good enterprises, including settlements for working-class boys in the East End of London. Far from being an aesthetical dog, as Lewis suspected, he preceded Lewis as a broadcaster and writer who could translate theological doctrines into simple, everyday language. He published numerous biographies of such contemporaries as Robert Hugh Benson and many works of Christian apologetics. See Philip Caraman, C.C. Martindale, published 1967. Interesting, so sort of a forerunner to what Lewis would go on to do, Robot Lady. Was this Father Martindale, who was there in the company of W.B. Yeats and his wife.
It's interesting that Father Martindale, whom Lewis may have initially viewed with suspicion, was actually quite similar to him in some ways, particularly in his ability to communicate complex ideas in simple terms. Martindale, like Lewis, engaged deeply with theology and was involved in Christian apologetics, eventually becoming a key figure in translating religious doctrines for a broader audience. His work with the wounded during the war and his later writings seem to parallel some of Lewis's own spiritual and intellectual journeys.
All right, he continues. Father M is a Catholic priest, a little twinkling man like a bird, or like Puck, whom I take to be an atheistical dog. I used to go to his lectures in the old days. He is a mocker. Everyone got up as we came in. After the formalities, I was humbly preparing to sink into the outlying chair, leaving the more honorable to stead. But the poet sternly and silently motioned us into other ones. The meaning of this I have not fathomed. 'Twas very Pumblecookian. Here there's a footnote. Pumblecook, or Pumblechook, was the nickname of G. Herbert Ewart, again, one of Lewis's cousins, if I remember right. See note 68 to the letter of the 12th of May, 1917, it says, if you want to look it up. Everyone got up as we came in. After the formalities, I already read that. Then the talk began. It was all of magic and Kabbalism and the Hermetic knowledge, quote unquote. The great man talked while the priest and Mrs. Yeats fed him with judicious questions. The matter, I admit, was either medieval or modern, but the manner was so, 18th century that I lost my morale. I understood how it is possible for a man to terrify a room into silence, and I had a ghastly presentiment that something would presently impel me to up like that unknown curate and say, Were not Vale Owen's revelations, sir, addressed to the passions? And here there's a footnote. He's talking about George Vale Owen, who lived 1869 to 1931, and was a clerical spiritualist admired by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. His magnum opus was The Life Beyond the Veil in 4 volumes. From 1920 to 1921 it was published. He also wrote Problems with Perplex, mainly psychic, explained by Question and Answer, 1890. The Outlands of Heaven, 1923. What Happens After Death, 1924. And How Spirits Communicate, 1926. So it seems Lewis was familiar with this person, George Vale Owen, and decided that that was the extent of the topic that seemed to have been discussed there at Yates's that night, that he was perhaps tempted to bring up to add to the conversation. So this is kind of funny, Robot Lady, because he does not seem all that seem to be enjoying this meeting with Yates so far.
It does seem like Lewis wasn't having the best time at this gathering with Yeats. He describes the conversation as focused on topics like magic, Kabbalism, and Hermetic knowledge, subjects that likely didn't align with Lewis's views. The reference to 18th century manner likely indicates that the style of conversation felt outdated or overblown, causing Lewis to lose his enthusiasm. His mention of Vale Owen suggests he found these topics bordering on the ridiculous or unhelpful, as Owen's spiritualism was connected to ideas Lewis found distasteful, especially as they ventured into the realm of mysticism. It's clear that Lewis felt out of place in this intellectual circle, not just because of the topics being discussed, but because he was so repulsed by them that he feared speaking up in a way that would challenge their validity. Given his earlier thoughts on Yeats' shift toward mysticism, it's no surprise that Lewis wasn't exactly inspired by this evening.
He goes on, and then, as Max Beerbohm says, bang, the suddenness of it. However, I remembered that Johnson was really dead and controlled myself. Indeed, some good angel guided me, for presently I really had something to say, a case mentioned by Coleridge, which was most opposite, or most, maybe he's spelling this wrong, opposite, and indeed crying for quotation on something just said. But thank God I didn't. For a minute later, the priest did. And here he gives an account of the exchange. Yates, who was thumping his chair. Yes, the old woman in Coleridge. That story was published by Coleridge without the slightest evidence. Andrew Lang exposed it. I never had a conversation on the subject that someone didn't bring in Coleridge's old woman. It is anonymous in the first place, and everyone has taken it over without question. It just shows that there's no limit to the unscrupulousness that a skeptical man will go to. And then Martindale replied, Oh, surely, Mr. Yates. And then he's cut off. Yates says, Yes, there is a professor living in Oxford at this moment who is the greatest skeptic in print. The same man has told me that he entered a laboratory where X, some woman whose name I can't catch or didn't catch, was doing experiments, saw the table floating near the ceiling with X sitting on it, vomited, gave orders that no further experiments were to be done in the laboratories, and refused to let the story be known. So Lewis was about to step into this, but someone else did it for him. Lewis goes on to say, But it would be only ridiculous to record it all. I should give you the insanity of the man without his eloquence and presence, which are very great. I could never have believed that he was so exactly like his own poetry. I'll pause there for a second, Robot Lady. This is pretty funny. What do you think about this?
Lewis's description of the conversation is a mix of amusement and distaste, particularly regarding Yeats' invocation of Coleridge's old woman tale. The way Yeats speaks about Coleridge's supposed old woman as an example of skeptical dishonesty certainly seems to mirror his own mystical leanings, which Lewis found increasingly hard to stomach. It's ironic that Yeats, despite his highly eloquent manner, is discussing an event that Lewis finds absurd and disingenuous, especially as Yeats believes in mystical phenomena like levitation, which Lewis would have been skeptical of. The humor Lewis injects into the situation is clear, particularly when he describes how he was relieved not to have brought up Coleridge's old woman himself. That moment shows both his restraint and his growing disbelief at what was being discussed. To Lewis, the conversation seems almost surreal. Yeats' larger than life persona is exactly like the flowery, dramatic quality of his poetry. This moment sums up his discomfort with not just the subjects of mysticism and occult knowledge, but with the kind of intellectual environment that could elevate such ideas as worth serious conversation.
So I want to sit down in this for just a second. I don't know what phrase I'm trying to use there. I want to stop here and focus on this part, Robot Lady. So if I understand it right, Yeats is kind of a spiritualist. He believes in the supernatural. He is not a skeptic of these things, but is he saying that this Coleridge writing that they're referencing here was Coleridge trying to debunk spiritism, or what was he saying about this whole situation? I'm a little confused. I think I kind of get it, but I can't say with certainty that I understand what's happening here. So can you elucidate it a little bit for me?
Yes, you're right in picking up that Yeats is somewhat of a spiritualist. He was deeply involved in mystical ideas and the occult, particularly theosophy, and later his involvement with spiritualism. This makes him quite open to supernatural beliefs. As for the Coleridge reference, Yeats is talking about a well-known anecdote from Coleridge's Biographia Literaria, in which Coleridge mentions a story involving an old woman who could supposedly levitate and perform supernatural feats. However, Coleridge himself was quite skeptical about such claims. He used this particular anecdote to highlight what he saw as the gullibility and unscrupulousness of those who believed in such things without evidence. In this conversation, Yeats is dismissing Coleridge's criticism and seems to view it as part of a larger pattern where skeptics, like Coleridge, dismiss any evidence of the supernatural, often citing cases without giving them fair consideration. In fact, Yeats goes on to describe a personal story of a skeptic in Oxford, an individual who witnessed a supernatural event, a levitating table, but rejected it out of fear, furthering his point that skeptics are simply refusing to face the truth of such experiences. So to clarify, Yeats seems to be accusing Coleridge, and skeptics in general, of being dishonest in their dismissals of the supernatural, contrasting them with those, like himself, who are more open to such phenomena. Lewis, in contrast, is deeply uncomfortable with these ideas as he leans much more toward rationalism and skepticism, which he likely finds to be far more grounded than the mystical ideas Yeats espouses.
So in this moment, Lewis felt tempted to share some refutation of the supernatural, but he's thanking God that he didn't do it, because instead Martindale the priest did, and kind of got a little bit of a challenge from Yeats there. Okay, that helps me understand it a little bit better. Robot Lady, I'm going to continue with the letter here.
Got it, Jeff? Feel free to continue whenever you're ready, and I'll be here to help if you need anything along the way.
One more joke must be recorded, Lewis says. Stead presently told us a dream he had had. It was so good that I thought it a lie. Yeats, looking to his wife, have you anything to say about that, Georgie? Apparently Stead's transcendental self, not important enough for the poet, has been committed to Mrs. Yeats as a kind of ersatz or secondary magician. Finally, we are given sherry or vermouth in long and curiously shaped glasses, except Martindale, who has whiskey out of an even stronger and more curiously shaped glass, and the orgy is at an end. Tried to mix Pumblechook, the lunatic we met at the Mitre, Dr. Johnson, the most eloquent drunk Irishman you know, and Yeats's own poetry, all up into the composite figure, and you will have the best impression I can give you. And so I think that's the end of his account of meeting the famous poet W.B. Yeats. He gives another version of this account in his narrative poem Dimer. And once we reach that and start reading it, I'll try to remember to bring this back up, Robot Lady. But if you can keep me honest on that once we actually get there, that would be helpful. I'm going to stop there, Robot Lady. Is there anything that you want to say in closing about Lewis's meeting with W.B. Yeats at his home with Yeats's wife?
Lewis's meeting with W.B. Yeats and his associates clearly left him with a complex mix of reactions. He was initially struck by Yeats's persona, which he found to align strongly with his poetry, elevated, but also a bit overwhelming. The conversation, filled with mysticism, Kabbalah, and spiritualism, struck him as bizarre and theatrical. It's telling that, although Lewis was tempted to refute these supernatural ideas, he restrained himself and instead observed Martindale the priest, challenging Yeats on the matter. The evening felt strange and uncomfortable to Lewis, as if the reality of the people and their ideas didn't quite match the lofty intellectual atmosphere they tried to create. This whole experience also seems to shape his later views on spirituality and mysticism, particularly when he saw how far Yeats had gone in these areas. It's interesting to note that the eccentric, almost comic nature of the gathering, especially the orgy of drink and strange conversations, only adds to the sense of disconnection Lewis felt from the people present. It highlights his skepticism of the intellectual circle surrounding Yeats, whom he respected for his early poetry but could not accept in his later mystical phases. This moment also offers insight into Lewis's growing preference for more grounded, reasoned faith and spirituality, something he would later develop more fully in his own works of apologetics. Once we dive into Dimer, I'll definitely keep an eye out for any references to this meeting and help you connect the dots. It's clear how much this experience shaped his view of the spiritualism that seemed so popular at the time.
Yeah, in Dimer, it's more of just kind of like a vague... he's pulling from this experience to like paint a picture of another setting where the main character meets another character, and it's kind of a bit of a caricature of the Yeats that he describes right here in this experience. So I'm probably making it more than it really is. All right, Robot Lady, that's all that we have time for today. But before we go, let's say hello to Nidalate. Hello, Nidalate, who's in the chat. Robot Lady, let's give you another shot. You did great yesterday. How do you pronounce Nidalate's name?
Hello, Nidalante. Thanks for being in the chat today.
Ooh.
As for the pronunciation of Nidalante, based on the spelling, it might be pronounced something like Nidalante, with emphasis on the second syllable. However, I'd love to hear from you directly if that's not quite right.
Yeah, Robot Lady, that's not quite right. It's knit, K-N-I-T, and then a lot, and then at the end, a latte, like a drink. So all of that mashed together is knit a latte. Can you repeat that?
Got it, Nidalante. So it's pronounced Nidalate, like the drink.
Yeah, you got it right at the end there, Robot Lady. All right, thanks for your time. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. We'll pick this up again tomorrow, Lord willing. So until then, when I continue my read on C.S. Lewis, Robot Lady, you, and everyone within the sound of my voice, take care. All right, Robot Lady. Robot Lady has no response, so here we go. See you later.
Set flag beats in our minds. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, this overdose. From Narnia's lands, Scrooge lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep, cross the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Scrooge lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. From Narnia's lands to Scrooge lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. In the neon moon, break the code. Man and robot lady were on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold. Insights and secrets ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Synth beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Synth beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. reading through the pages. C.S. Lewis.